Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to Between Two Sermons. I'm Rich. I'm here with Pastor Rob, and we're going to talk about the purpose of work in the context of Ephesians chapter 6. So I just heard your message, and a question that came to my mind right away is we just finished our spiritual formation conference.
Right.
And we were talking about life on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that came up a lot in that context is the fact that in our culture, a lot of people find their identity in their work.
Yeah.
And they very much, evaluate themselves on the title that they hold or their rank in a company or their performance review at work or something like that. How would you speak to what's the Christian view? Where should we value work?
Yeah, I think as you use the key word identity, it's a big concept in the scriptures. We get our identity in Christ. Mm-hmm. I think this passage is even emphasizing that because it's saying slaves, or you might even say even slaves, if you want to think of it, or people in the let's say the lower end of the spectrum of jobs. Mm-hmm. He's addressing, let's say, slaves. He's saying because you're a Christian, you can serve in your job as if you were serving Christ. Notice all work has great dignity, at the highest dignity. Even then when he talks about slaves and masters, you're serving the same Lord. So I think it makes sense that people, you and me included, find some level of identity in our work. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. You get a different job, you get a promotion, maybe you change careers. There's a sense, and I think that's important, that we gain some identity from our work, from our job, but to be overly focused on it, for your job to define who you are, I think that becomes a real problem. Because as I think I mentioned, we live in a world where people, self-fulfillment, self-actualization, we're so self-focused, and many people do look to their careers, sometimes maybe their families, but even maybe more their careers in today's world. And that's going to be what makes me happy. That's what's going to be to give my life meaning. And really your job, whatever it is, can't carry that kind of weight.
Of course.
So I think the best approach, as this passage highlights, maybe he's using slaves as an extreme example to say, even if a slave, whatever it might mean in the first century, can find joy in their work because they're looking beyond simply what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're looking at what they're doing. They're doing it with integrity, but they have a motivation beyond it. It can give them a greater sense of purpose.
Yeah. So you're saying you can find joy in your work, but through the lens of the fact that your work is an act of service to Jesus.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think, he even says, to your earthly masters. I mean, that's the word, because he's talking about slaves and masters. Yeah. And I think he's making that point. Why would you say the word earthly? He's saying, keep in mind that as a Christian, this isn't true for non-Christians, you are serving always two things at the same time. You even when we talk about the covenant of marriage, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. There's this dual relationship. And same with work. I have an earthly, boss, let's say, or supervisor, however you look at it, coach. Yeah. But really, I'm at the same time, I'm also serving Christ, and the beauty of it is that it gives dignity to all work, dignity to all service, dignity to all things that you do, and to say, you know what, God, God can reward me even in this passage for the work that I do, even if I'm doing sweeping the floor. Yeah,
that's great. I think about the fact too that sometimes growing up you think of I always thought of work as a bad thing. My dad's like, hey, Saturday morning, you got to help me chop wood. I don't want to do that. Right. And I remember being taught when I was young that, Adam did work in the garden.
Yeah.
Like, work is not an evil thing,
I didn't touch on it much in the sermon, but you nailed it. Typically when I was younger in my faith, and even maybe kind of pre-Christian, but sort of Christian world that I lived in, the sense of Christian worldview, I always thought work was a curse.
Yeah.
Work was the curse. And the ideal thing, even in life, is when can I be finished with work?
Yeah, when
when
can I
can I
be free?
retire?
Yeah.
You know, but actually the Bible doesn't say that at all.
Yeah.
Before there even is the fall of man, Genesis 3, or the, mankind, humanity, it says God worked, and on the seventh day God rested. Work is given dignity by God himself.
Yeah.
Before there's ever, and then once even pre Genesis 3, Adam is given work to do.
Yeah.
Genesis chapter 2,
Naming
the
the animals.
animals.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what happened in the fall was not the creation of work, was the corruption of work, of all of life. So work became, thorns and thistles, I think is the words. In other words, it becomes more difficult. Marriage becomes more difficult.
Totally.
Everything becomes more difficult.
Yeah.
But work has dignity. Work existed by God himself, but also by the progenitors of the human race. And certainly, this is another subject, but people think, well, what's heaven like? The eternity. Are we sitting around just playing harps and eating grapes
work,
or whatever?
No,
I think work is fundamental to our lives.
Yeah.
And it's always going to have a level of frustration in it because of sin in the world.
Yeah.
But work is a great way for us to be Christians and express our faith.
That's a great transition to where I wanted to go next, which is, so you talk about how, so work is not a bad thing, but after the fall, there is frustration and distortion in everything, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to the person who's watching this, who's listening to this, who their workplace or whatever it is not a joyful place.
Yeah.
And be that the work is really hard, they feel misaligned with the work, or they have backbiting, gossipy coworkers, or they have a terrible boss, or whatever that may be. How can we kind of protect ourselves from contributing to a negative workspace?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's all about having a Christian worldview and having a deep faith. So I don't wish for anybody, including myself, bad work environments, bad work conditions. And if I can improve it, I should. Even Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 to the slaves, just whatever role you've been given, live out your faith there. But if you can find your freedom, go for it. Just a half a verse.
Right.
So I would say the same to you and me. If I'm in a place where I can make things better, I can speak the truth in love to a cranky boss or an employee. I should do all those things. But I think the perspective this passage paints, which is to say the what you're doing, the conditions, good or bad, that shouldn't be the only thing I'm looking at.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many examples. We talked a little bit in the sermon about Joseph, just because many people know that story, but there are others. But here's a young man, eventually an old man, in from Genesis 37 to 50, who lived this long life, and you could say, books have been written about it. He gets blessed by God. Right, this huge blessing, which is this dream, like a monster-sized change the world dream, and then from that point on, it's one negative turn after another.
Totally.
It's almost like you could almost say, if you were in the middle of his life, like, is this a joke?
Yeah.
This is
why would God play with this?
This is the opposite of what I thought, but what it turns out to be, he doesn't realize it until he does, that God was using those difficulties and using those challenges and temptations, and using even people, the offenses, whether it was by his brothers or by Potiphar's wife or other people, the butler, they were using those offenses to deepen his own trust in God, to deepen his own character, to maybe elevate his eyes above his circumstances. That's powerful. So I think in that sense, there's a lot for us to learn. And it's typical for non-believers. Christians act like non-believers. I do, and you do all the time too, in our thinking. But it's very typical for them to it's what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
If I got a bad working condition, or a cranky boss, or they're not paying me enough, or I'm other people are getting favors because of their nepotism. All of those that we can look and say that's the whole picture.
Yeah.
But as a Christian, we should have a larger view. We can look at the whole board, as they say, like a chess game. We can see what other people don't see.
Yeah. Well, last question for you today. If someone is, they're listening at this point and they're still thinking to themselves, all this is all well and good, but I don't even feel that I have any purpose at all.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have a job and I don't do anything productive
Yeah.
or I, maybe people who are, whatever, medical issue, unable to work,
Yeah.
whatever. What would you say to someone who came to you and said, I don't even think I have a purpose?
Yeah, I think I think it's a question of start where you are. The first story that came to my mind when you were asked that question was Moses. So this is a strange maybe when Moses is super frustrated and overwhelmed by what God has asked him to do, and he just feels so inadequate in every way. And then God says, "Now I want you to go speak to the most powerful man around and tell him X, Y, and Z." And Moses says, "What?"
Yeah.
He says, "What in the world would make this guy listen to me?" And God says this, "What's that in your hand?" And what do you have? A staff. He says, "That's all. That's what he came from."
Yeah.
And God says, "That's good enough." And throw it down. You know the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So I think what I would say is we tend to think in ways that unless we have a super duper job or we're very healthy or we're like other people, even somebody who is let's say in the hospital listening to this, they if they can listen and they have their faculties, they can just, that's an extreme example, but they can pray for people. I'll bet you everyone has people they can pray for.
Yeah.
They can interact with the people in a caring and loving way. You think nurses and doctors are living on Easy Street because they drive a nice car? No, they're full of problems and headaches like everybody else. So I think we need to, what's the staff that's in your hand? And what agency do you have right now, even if that agency is I'm sick in bed, but I can pray, I can think, I can talk to people, or I'm unemployed. Some people are unemployed, but even people that are unemployed, even extended unemployment, still lots you can do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can decide there's people who need some practical help, right? That you have the time to do it. Maybe you're even getting unemployment as an example.
Sure.
So money's not your issue as much as doing something.
Yeah.
So I think we overcomplicate it. I do at times, and say to myself, who can I serve? What's in my hand, number one, and what's around me? And if the least I can do, let's say I am that person who's in a bed with a temporarily or extended sickness, I can be praying for people. And so I think we just need to do what we can. Like I thought of that story when Jesus mentions the woman who anointed him, and we never hear anything about her. She didn't even have a name. And everyone was critical of her behavior of putting this perfume on Jesus' feet. And he said, don't criticize her.
Yeah.
She did what she could.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of that, the whole world's going to know it. Think about that.
It's awesome.
So I think that's what I would say.
Well, this is great. Yeah. So a great question that comes out of this passage is, are we living and working within our calling? And are we doing that with all of our hearts?
Right.
So that's a great conversation to have within your groups. Until next time, this has been Between Two Sermons.